Hello and welcome to the Whole Energy Body Balance podcast. Today we're exploring the life of the indoor cat with Shanti Zinzi, who is very passionate about cats, and I love cats too, so we're going to have lots of fun. So welcome. This podcast is a place where we explore all kinds of possibilities and practices that bring greater healing, connection and harmony to pets, people and horses. And we aim to inspire you, to hopefully challenge you a little bit. If you want to grow and create positive changes in your life and in the lives of the beings that you care for, you are in the right place. I'm your host, Dr. Edward, healing vet. I help deeply caring people, pets and horses unfold profound healing and healthy relationships through using the whole energy body balance method, which is a modality I've created, kind training, and I practice as a holistic, integrative, intuitive veterinarian all around the world and in person. So I'd love to welcome try and organise. We've had all sorts of technical challenges today. The computers and things have not been working for us. So Shanti Zinzi is an experienced holistic feline behaviour therapist with a diverse background that spans decades in veterinary practices, animal shelters, sanctuaries and wildlands. And her studies encompass a whole lot of natural, ancient medicine, feline and human psychology and behaviour, as well as independent planetary stewardship. So we're going to start off with a big question, because big questions always are a good place to start with, I think, anyway. So Shanti, who are you? Why do you do what you do, and how did you get to this point in your life?
Dr. Edward, thank you. Delightful to be able to be here with you today. And my journey was pretty circuitous. I always wanted to go into the veterinary field in some capacity, but working in veterinary practices as a very young person, I realized I wanted to find a different path. And I studied psychology and behavior, postgraduate and somatics, and simultaneously worked at veterinary practices in shelters and did a lot of an internship in holistic hospice and rescued a lot of animals. And it organically came about that I was applying a lot of what I was learning to the animals that were slated for euthanasia, rehoming them, and went on to worked for a fantastic pioneer that was great in TCVM and inspired me to study postgraduate Chinese medicine. And in California, if it's veterinary approved and the person has enough training as far as anatomy, physiology of domestic animals, we can practice at veterinary practices with the vets. So it's been a really wonderful journey. Getting here and very circuitous. It feels like the path was laid for me. And also because I refused to accept a bit of that reductionist paradigm, which I felt, there's more of a tapestry of life. And we were sort of strong arming our animals in the 1990s that I felt was quite traumatic and for them. And I thought there is another way that is more earth conscious, animal conscious, that can facilitate healing. Mm-hmm. And along the way, I've met some amazing pioneers in the field in holistic medicine. And here I am today. I'm not as active in it now. I'm sort of more working with wildlife, but I'm always happy to return to the field and help the animals and the cats and the dogs.
And cats are a real passion for you, yeah? You really, really resonate with cats.
Well, I love dogs just as much. I think because of the vacuum in the field, there was really a vacuum here in the 80s and 90s. And I remember being in the middle of an exam and people would say, oh, my cats are fighting. There's the abscesses. And people were told, let them work it out. And I just intuitively knew that wasn't the right thing. But I think there was just a lack of maybe there was a lack of understanding or vacuum in understanding in the field. So it sort of created my niche in feline behavior. And then working a lot with behavioral animals at the animal shelter in San Francisco in the government shelter, preparing them for their behavior tests and exams, working with the disenfranchised population that really couldn't afford to see veterinarians. So if they needed to introduce a new animal to the household or they had behavioral problems at home, like I was often called upon to assist them.
Okay. So, I'm in small animal practice, holistic small animal practice. I reckon I'd be lucky to see one cat for every 20 dogs. And that's been a bit of a common theme, right across my whole career. I see way, way more dogs than cats in veterinary practice. And I kind of wonder if that's another reflection of the same kind of dynamic that you're talking about, in that cats just don't necessarily get the same level of care as dogs do, right across the board.
Well, thinking back into like the original like employment places I was working, there was a fair amount of both, I think. Yeah, I think there wasn't. In the United States, dogs are quite popular and cats sort of go in and out of fashion. I think, sort of the domestic animal, which one is preferred? Cats are a little bit easier. Often, in apartments, people can't have dogs or large dogs, or it's landlord prohibitive. Um, but I think, there seemed to be, like, at least when I think back into like sort of animal shelter time, there was many dog volunteers, many animals, many people taking care of the dogs, but there weren't as many for the felines or the small animals. So I just always sort of go to where I'm needed, and I just felt like the path just unfolded for me. You just sort of uh, you find your way. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah. I do think there was a fair amount of dogs and cats in all the practices that I actually had worked at, or at the animal shelter.
Might be a bit more that way in Australia, perhaps. So today we're really digging into exploring the life of the indoor cat and the kind of pressures too, I think, that mean that a lot of cats are indoor and don't have access to the outdoor. So I'm really curious about what you've got to share with us on what you're saying is a neglected area that can really affect feline health.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share that. And I watch a lot of trends and things that change, and there's a sentiment that, oh, the indoor cat is so much safer. Yet as time is going on, especially here, they're dying younger. And not necessarily meaning they're getting, annual vaccines. Some of them are not even getting the flea and tick insecticide, being indoor animals. And people have a lot more awareness and consciousness of raw diets and healthy home cooked diets, and they're not choosing dry food. So I sort of am looking further into this and realizing, as where I live in San Francisco, we're going through these economic, booms, and what's happening with development is I started seeing in the past maybe 14, 15 years lung cancer in cats, which I've never seen before, which and even in dogs. I had never seen it before. The particular people I was working with, or the vets I was working for, they hadn't seen it either. So that sort of turned on a switch, and realizing the amount of development and fine particulate matter and whatever was going on in the homes, formaldehyde with all these whatever we're using for building material, fungicides, flame retardants, and these things that they're exposed to indoors that they're not necessarily breathing outside. And there was a study that went on in 2023 that was measuring these chemicals in the urine of dogs and the urine of cats. And it was found that cats have 23 times the amount of flame retardants than dogs do. They have 5 times. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. But how I'm understanding that, or how I'm making sense of that, is we're bringing all these new products, cheap fashion sofas, and these things that are sprayed with flame retardant into our homes, cat beds. they are breathing that. Their noses are so close to it. They are also getting it on their coats and they're ingesting it. Most people keep their, they may have an HVAC system and the cats are not breathing the fresh air. So they're breathing this stale, polluted indoor air. And we're not realizing how much that's affecting us and affecting them. And as I see it, they're just like birds. They're quite sensitive and a bit of the canary in the coal mine. And it's said that what could happen to us in a couple of decades can happen to a cat in 2 to 3 years. Disease process.
Oh, wow. Just say that again. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think so too. And this is a lot about indoor chemicals and indoor like toxins and what is actually in the air. So, okay, what can affect a cat in 2 to 3 years? So this could be thyroid disease, cancer, asthma, taking that long to build with cumulative assaults can take a human a couple of decades. So you're thinking,
you might take a dog, 5 or 6 years rather than a cat 2 or 3, I would think. Yeah, dogs are a bit more resilient to this kind of thing, I presume.
and dogs are going outside. We're taking them out. We're walking them.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think about it too is, when we're out there taking our dogs for walks, we're literally interacting with, they're interacting with beneficial soil organisms, which the cats are not indoors. There's phytoncides that are released from oaks and cedars and cypress and pine trees. And as we're inhaling these essential oils and phytoncides, which are the antifungals of these trees and the antimicrobials, we breathe them, they interact with the immune system, and they enhance natural killer cells. So that's an anti-cancer. So what the Japanese have always called forest bathing, and now we're finally catching on, in the Western mind and Western science, that we are literally, enhancing our immune system, enhancing the natural killer cells from breathing what our trees are emitting. And it's dogs going up for walks, the same. Their feet are in the soil, their paws, they're breathing this fresh air, they're interacting, they're rolling around in the soil with beneficial soil organisms. And the indoor cat does not have access to these things.
That's true, isn't it? And cats have evolved to be outside, and I think the same thing is true for us humans and dogs and everyone. We are not evolved to live in a little box with artificial lighting and artificial EMFs and, like you said, an incredibly high toxic load in a lot of homes. And I think new homes are probably these days got a much higher toxic load than older homes too, yeah?
Incredibly high. The older homes, they deal with like mold often, and the newer homes, the toxins are incredibly high. New windows, they'll off gas for 2 years. Any new product, any new paints, it's about a 2-year off gassing process. And what we're not quite, aware, or conscious of, like our animals have 100 million more scent receptor cells in their nose
Yes.
than they're so incredibly sensitive, and they come into life. Our kittens come into the world. They don't see, but they're smelling for their mom and the queen. It's a very strong developed sense there. So another fascinating thing is they have apparently cats. It is said that there's a particular protein receptor, the V1R, that humans have too, and it differentiates between smells. Dogs have about 9, and cats have 30. So cats can be better at search and rescue than dogs. I mean, it's just a matter of training them. And the animal that has the highest are rats, which in Africa, they actually do have rats do search and rescue, and they're better at it than dogs because they can get into small places. But I think, if we just take that into our consciousness and we realize how important their noses are, they have a vomeronasal nasal organ. There's so much information that is coming into their little bodies. So air quality, indoor air, what's happening in the homes is vitally important to their health and their well-being, as well as their behavior and their cognitive awareness. if they're in the homes and all the windows are shut, we're not stimulating their vulnerable nasal organs. So I just always ask people to open up the windows and let them smell what's going on outside, so get cross breeze and fresh air. And
Even if it's just a little bit, if it's cold, you can still have
well,
the
I kind of like a lot, when I think about it, because when I look at homes, we often, and again, I'm not really quite sure, different parts of the world, it's different. A lot of people there's a stack effect that happens in buildings. People love to store things in their garages, and the VOCs, the high VOCs, the paint thinner, all the chemicals, the
yeah.
varnishes. And that, if there's a change in the atmospheric pressure, or even if you're closing your garage door, all that stuff comes up through the ventilation system, through the floorboards, comes right into the house. Generally, the top floor gets a lot of that. So, if you're in a two-family, if you're a particular high-rise or however, wherever you're living, what's going on below you is coming up. And the animals and our cats are breathing all of that on top of synthetic carpeting and whatever cleaners or chemicals or fragrances that we're putting on, our hands. People are using nail varnish, all kinds of cleaners and these different agents that I don't think we have a conscious awareness of how this affects the neuroimmune system and really affects the thyroid. It affects the respiratory system. And no wonder there's an epidemic of asthma in our cats. At least here there is.
I totally agree. I think too that another thing to consider is that these volatile organic compounds are absorbed not only through the scent, but through every single bit of the skin. And cats have a larger surface area to volume ratio than most dogs and humans. So they actually absorb a whole lot more, right?
And they're right. And they're ingesting it, right? Because they're continually grooming. So they're actually, whatever is resting on the outside of their fur, they're actually swallowing. So I feel like they're getting a bit of a triple whammy here with toxin load.
Yes. So I suppose another reason that cats are indoors is that cats get a bit of a bum rap in today's world. They're not the most popular creature, right? People seem to kind of say nasty things about cats. A lot of people have a hate on cats. So I'd love you to explore that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I have a very passionate opinion, which I've shared with you about it before. And living in different countries myself and just watching the political campaigns and what's happening, I think there's a bit of a diversion, at least continental United States, and Japan is different from this. I'll say islands may be different. Rome is very different. Turkey is very different. The United States, but I think what's happening as I see it, when I started seeing this vilification campaign where they started talking about here where I am, feral cat shooting day, and that, they're eating up the ground foragers of the birds. I started looking at where these studies were coming from and where the funding was. And Monsanto was funding Audubon. And I thought, the fascinating part is
Why?
there's
Why?
one.
Why would Monsanto be funding that kind of research? What's your thoughts?
Well,
That kind of makes me go, what the heck? Why?
I think a diversion campaign a little because in my opinion, the huge eco destroyers are the corporations,
Yeah.
right? And this is the insecticides and the herbicides and the glyphosates and the atrazine and what's on the food crop.
Yeah.
That's killing our pollinators. So even this latest neonicotinoid is just terrifying, which destroys the nervous system of the bee. And one single, in the Americas, we've got corn crops and wheat crop. One single corn kernel will kill a songbird or 80,000 bees. But yet, instead of focusing on the food supply or agribusiness or agricorps, we sort of put all of this blame onto the feline, into domestic felines. Now, in the United States, we have 6 wildcats. So our animals, our birds, they're very used to predators. I'm out there pretty aware of when there's a predator nearby, they're warning each other. There's warning calls. So, other than maybe a very young one who isn't quite aware, and is feeding birdseed off the floor, which a cat can easily get, I think we're unfairly is a little bit of it's not quite a red herring, but we're taking a percentage of a truth and we're embellishing it. And we're creating a very divisive narrative that has, in the United States, people are at each other's throats about outdoor cats. I know, like, where in Australia, it's not even legal to have them outside. And I do have a feeling we may be moving towards that because it is uh, a very inflamed topic, and people aren't really taking enough time to unpack the narrative. I think there's a corporate agenda that's behind it that's just pointing our attention in one direction.
Well, I hadn't thought of that, but I know that all these big companies are very, very good at misdirection and look at that, rather than noticing what they're up to. And you also mentioned that there's a historical kind of thing where cats have been demonized going back a long time. Yeah, I mean, if we go back far enough, they were back in Egyptian times. Of course, they were very much venerated, but then we came more to European times, and things changed a bit.
Yes, and that was in the medieval times, the Middle Ages, and I do tend to look at, historically, there's the ebbs and flows of life and opinions and popular opinions and domestic cats, or I mean, I don't even call them domestic cats. They've befriended us, and we actually made them to be mousers, or because there was this symbiotic relationship between cats and humans. We've taken them across the globe. We've employed them to eat the mice on ships, and we've taken them to other countries. Now we're labeling them invasive. But there was a pope at the time where they were burning people at the stake for witchcraft and herbalism that also mentioned that black cats were, sort of, he vilified them in a sense that they were almost like demon spawn. And some historians will actually say that due to the fact that they were killing cats in Western Europe at the time, that the plague became out of control because the black rat population exploded because there were less cats taking care of keeping the rodent problem down, which to me is fascinating. I can't say if that's 100%, factual reality, but I think that's a very interesting perspective. And of course, yes, cats could have carried the plague at the time because of the fleas, but I just found that to be interesting that a few people had pointed out in certain countries in Europe where the animals or the cats were vilified and also burned at the stake along with the witches, that the plague was out of control. And decimated a lot more humans. There was a higher mortality in the humans, which I think that's just a fascinating thing to explore.
Kind of unintended consequences on steroids, isn't
it? Yeah.
So you also have this thing about what was it that you said? I think you said that you have this thing about planetary care for the planet, independent planetary stewardship. What do you mean by that?
I think it's a matter of understanding the tapestry of life. I like to, I mean, my mind, I have the mind of an explorer. So I like to often explore indigenous paradigms. And I think as a planetary steward, we're here to protect the planet, other sentient life, which of course includes the domestic animals, the wild animals, flora and fauna, and to treat all sentient life with the amount of reverence we would of our own family.
Uh-huh. Oh, I love to hear that. I'm very much in agreement with that. And I think that pretty much all of humanity's and the planet's problems would be rapidly cured if humanity, the majority of humanity, could shift to that mindset. Yeah.
I really do. And the sad part, I did feel there was a time we were moving toward that. But, post pandemic, there was a lot of narratives that happened that were fed to us as we were sitting in front of computer screens and TVs and our phones. And a lot of this paradigm came down on us that was very reductionist, empirical paradigm that is not very planet friendly. It's not a steward of the planet. The sort of, this this narrative that I feel is very empirical science paradigm. It's not a holistic lens or view of what's happening on the planet or disease process or even the virus process. So I feel that we've made a little bit of a regression in humanity that we have to get back on track, because there was a lot of narratives that came forward. Suddenly we started using a lot of bleach again and certain endocrine disruptors, and it just became a very, very divisive time. And now that we're so polarized, I feel like there's almost like the psychologist in me is going to say Stockholm syndrome, that we were all, so terrified that we're now like taking these narratives. And, it's very volatile here right now in the United States, especially post-election, the left and the right. And a lot of that was created. I live in grew up in a city and live in a city now that was very the independent minded, and I don't find that any longer. I find like suddenly there's a very strong line of trust to whatever the corporate mainstream narrative is, and that corporate mainstream narrative, in my opinion, does not promote planetary stewardship. It promotes a lot of polarization between each other as humans and how we treat animals, how we treat the planet, and even boiling down to how we're viewing our domestic cats.
Well, something that just kind of popped into my mind while you were talking is that authoritarian type thinking is the opposite of this whole planetary stewardship too, because in all the indigenous peoples, there was not really an authoritarian thing. There's a very everyone was part of everything, and everyone is in relationship to everything else. I sort of wonder if part of the reason that cats are so demonized is because they are independent. They do not bow to human authority whatsoever. Whereas most dogs, they're very much, I don't know if subservient is the right word, but they look up to humans and do whatever the humans want, whereas cats are like, well, screw you, I'm a cat, I do what I want. What do you think of that? Do you think that could be part of these deeper dynamics that affect how humans behave and then impact on cats?
That's an excellent point. And I think that as you're saying that, it made me sort of think back to like the patriarchy. If I cannot control you, I will demonize you. That goes back to the times of women, animals, cats. It's a fantastic point. And yes, dogs have a very pack mentality, and they're looking for their kind, gentle leader, which is going to hopefully be their human if the person can step into the role. So they absolutely want to please us. I personally find cats to be just as affectionate as dogs. And yes, I'm a cat person, but I do think, yes, that can have a lot to do with it, because they do not need us. They are not trying to please us. So I do think that does affect the psychological mindset towards them. And that's perhaps part of the demonization process, as you were saying. That could definitely be a factor there.
Yeah, look, I love cats. I've got a cat. He's big and fluffy, and he's not the smartest cat in the world, but he thinks he's pretty beautiful, and he knows he's pretty beautiful, and he comes and cuddles up with us, and he's very friendly too. But at the same time, he's very different to the dogs. Very, very different. So what do you tell people to help keep their cats healthy? Now, if people are constrained, and here in Australia, cats are not a native animal, mind you, there's 5 billion feral cats all over Australia. So why they're demonising the domestic cats that are outdoors, I don't know either. Quite, it doesn't make much rational sense. But your country, there's native cats, so that shouldn't be such a problem. But what's your advice? How can people change what they do with indoor cats if they do have these constraints to hopefully not make them sick early and die young?
Well, I think there's a different like foundation practices, right? Our relationship with touch, which is your fantastic web program, how we're actually how we're feeding them. So obviously promoting a non-processed diet, raw diet, or home cooked diet, feline biologically appropriate. I think we need to take the outside elements into the home if they have to be, if it's deemed legal, they have to be inside, or the person prefers it that way. Take the outdoor element into the inside. And to me, that looks like lots of plants, whether they're native plants to the area or plants that are actually such as some like moss, Boston ivy, what they call the snake plant. There's a lot of plants that are actually cleaning formaldehyde out of the air. So I think green up the home, and apparently, I mean, it's a lot of plants. It takes a green thumb, but there was a particular study that was saying, well, to get the air completely clean inside the home, what would you need? And you probably need one plant for every square foot of home. But you
That's a
can
lot
green
of
up.
plants.
Yeah, it's a lot of plants. But imagine how fresh the air would be. So I ask people to, green up as much as they can. You can add the catnip, whether or not they like catnip, or certain herbs that are attractive to cats.
Yeah.
Bring the soil into the home. I mean, this could just be pots of soil, vats of soil that, that they're actually can roll around in it, that they're getting some kind of benefit from actual soil. There's so many, like we were saying a little earlier, the beneficial soil organisms that exist in soil that we're deprived of. Keep the windows open as much as you can, 4 to 8 hours a day, preferable. I mean, that's always weather dependent, so that they can actually smell what's going on outside. There's so much in that vomeronasal nasal organ that they're registering. There's even a sense of time where they can tell, last week there was coyotes or particular wildlife that passed by 2 weeks ago, last night. I mean, there's so much information that's cognitively stimulating them, if they're accessing that fresh air. I ask people if they can, there's a few certifications for clean that are green certifications, whatever they're taking into the home. One is the GOTS certification for textiles. There's another one that's for sofa, it's organic products that are okay for the home, that that are registering. It's not really dangerous amount of emissions. And there's certain things that you could find like that are baby blankets for humans. Because a lot of moms are pretty concerned that their babies are breathing flame retardants and absorbing it through their skin. So instead of investing in all these like plastic toys and these cat beds and all these things that we think are spoiling our cats, we should just go out into nature and get some leaves and pick up some twigs and get some soil and let them play with things that are found in nature that they find quite stimulating. And attract the birds if you like. You could, if you want to put a feeder. I mean, there's always some problems with that because of bird flu. But it's just like in my area, we have a native hummingbird. So all we do is we put some pink flowers or a bougainvillea out in the window, and the hummingbirds, one that lives here year round, will be feeding there. So the hummingbird is safe on the other side of the window, and the cat is entertained.
So you've got, that's enrichment, right? So you're bringing the outdoors indoor in a way. Like plant life is not just enrichment; it's also cleaning the air, but bringing things from nature into the cat's life inside the home to make a difference.
Yes, definitely. And I think for their health too, we have to be very aware of gas appliances. There's benzene, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and we're getting a lot more than we think we are if we have gas appliances. This is a terrible fact, and this is a reason why it's outlawed in New York City. If you're building a brand new apartment structure or complex, you're no longer allowed to use gas appliances because of how it's harming human health. So pets are getting it before we are. So I always advise people, and I do it myself, is invest in one that pilots use because it's a lot more sensitive for carbon monoxide detector. And you can and you can also clean the air with those, not a HEPA filter, but those heavy duty carbon filter air filters such as IQ Air, which is made in Switzerland, or Air Pure, which is made in Canada. I think it's about like a 22 or 23 pound filter, and it'll clean smoke and formaldehyde and different things out of the actual air for every 500 square feet of space.
And you can use ionizers, I would imagine, too, to increase the vitality and the health of the air in the house.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
suppose, buy organic, non-toxic, get rid of artificial fragrances out of your life, because I find them dreadful for me, and they're a terrible, terrible thing for animals.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it's some people with chronic illness are incredibly sensitive, and I'm always saying, well, that's actually a gift because we're realizing that these poisons are affecting us. So it's actually, as terrible as it makes us feel, our body's giving us a gift to sensitize us to that. But yes, as much as you can, get the cleaners out. And if you have to have these particular products, which most people put under their kitchen sink in the United States, I always ask them to buy an airtight container and store it outside of the home so that it's not affecting the air in the home. If you need a bleach, but if we go back to baking soda, white vinegar, and lemon, there's like a sort of these natural cleaning products. It's going to save our respiratory system. It's going to save our lungs. It's going to save our immune system. It's going to save our cats. And these corporations that are making billions of dollars off of us are, going to have to change their game plan with what they're offering the public.
What about taking cats for walks? Is that a good idea?
I think it's great. I think my very first cat, I found her in Washington Square Park in New York City. She moved around all over the world. She moved with me to Japan. She moved to San Francisco with me, and I took her on walks. I took her on a harness, but she was the type, there's a continuum in the personality, the very shy, terrified, stranger danger cats. It's going to be very hard to do. But those very social animals, you can train them. And I think, there's certain times of day, like I would maybe go out at 10 p.m. and I had a great big gentle Rottweiler, take the two of them out, and I wouldn't go very far because she didn't quite, walk very far, but we just go outside and sit outside, and she loved it. So if you can do it, I think it's great. Or when people have decks or lanai, or even those small areas in the yard, such as people will put up those catios, which are fantastic. They're protecting the wildlife is not being accessed, and the cats can breathe that fresh outdoor air and see the cornucopia of life that is actually out there with the insects and the trees and the breezes and all those chemical messages that are on the breezes that are so important for them. They have direct access to that. And we don't have to worry about occupying them like we're a dog. So for me, a dog's a lot more work, and I love dogs, but having to entertain them cognitively is a little bit exhausting, where a cat is so much easier.
That's that beauty of the cat being a more independent kind of creature, right?
Yes, there you go. That's right.
Okay. I think, is there anything else that you'd like to share with everyone that might help people with indoor cats give them the best life possible?
I think, if you maybe clean water, right? However you're giving them, putting the water or food in. For example, I think the best product would be a food grade stainless steel or glass, because of whatever can be, if there's a chip in that ceramic plate, then there's an actual lead glaze that's inside ceramic that's going to be leaching into their food or their water. So if we can make conscious choices as far as everything they have access to, keep the dust to an absolute minimum, because these chemicals and molds will actually stick to the dust. And where the cats are, we're not seeing those dust particles. I think if we can keep that to a basic minimum, remember their cognitive stimulation, be very aware of the relationship of touch, which I think your program is absolutely the best for, so that animals can learn to feel very safe in their humans' touch. And it opens doors inside of us, this intimacy and this tapestry of interconnectedness that will really, I think, raise our awareness to what's happening inside our animals. So if we have these basic foundations covered, we're going to have very happy animals.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love cats. And, anyone out there who has got a hate on cats, maybe you could just chill out a little bit and appreciate them for the independent, wild creatures they are. I think one of the things about cats too is that they still got more of the wild in them than dogs
I love
and
that.
dogs. And, maybe that's another reason they get demonized, because they actually are more wild and free, and humanity struggles with that sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I always say, when people think they're these top predators, I'm like, it's not a mountain lion, it's not a tiger. Our coyotes here, and even just on my corner, I have a family of great horned owls, which are enormous, and they are taking the neighbors' hens and chickens, and they actually have taken kittens. So
Oh, wow.
they're, and I'm not, it's a whole can of worms, but cats are not top of the food chain in the United States. So I think we have to really kind of look at that argument about that eco destroyers, um, and really put that into perspective and realize that, when we're emotionally charged about a certain issue, which of course we all want to save the environment and ecology and wildlife and these small animals, we have to really disengage that emotional aspect and look deeper into what's actually happening and realize all sentient life, there's a tapestry of wonder here that exists where our pets, our animals, our cats, the flora, the fauna, ourselves. And if we could just offer respect and care, that it would be a lot happier planet.
It would be. So we're going to close up with a couple of questions. And the first one is the wake up call. What do you think is humans' biggest blind spot when it comes to our shared journey of evolution and healing and wellness?
Well, this kind of dovetails a little into what I was saying earlier about mainstream narratives and corporate narratives. I think, there's a lot of what's happened in Western reality is there was a monopoly on our thinking process from indigenous reality of how we see the earth, how we see medicine and healing. That became an allopathic model that has monopolized our thinking. And it is an empirical reductionist model that will measure the world through the five senses. That does not measure mind or consciousness. Healing
Yeah.
does not happen without mind or consciousness or the soul. So for me, when we listen to these narratives, I think it's harming us, it's harming the planet. I think that's my biggest, probably one of my biggest issues of contention, because there's major corporations that have studied us and our psychology. They've hired, psychiatrists and psychologists to understand group and mass psychology to sell us their products and to really create, I think, what I would consider a fear model. That is, I just see it as an outgrowth of the patriarchy. It is not a model of togetherness or an earth conscious model, but a more of a corporate model. What are they trying to sell us, and who is benefiting from that? So,
Well, not the average human being, not any of the animals, not the environment, just a few people making large amounts of money.
the billionaires, right? Just the billionaires getting richer, as the earth is struggling more, and our animals and our humans are struggling.
And what is the change that you want to be and inspire others to be in this world?
Well, I think I sort of always went to the gym, a different beat. But I'd like to inspire change in the way of getting people back to their innate nature of inner intelligence of connectedness, and
Mm,
trusting their inner voice. That I think is specifically in the Western paradigm and in schools, it's programmed out of us. We're taught to sit in these desks and look in these computers, and everything is kept in a box, as opposed to going from a heart sense where, our heart is even more powerful than the brain, our electromagnetic waves from our heart, what we're
Absolutely.
radiating out of, to listen to those voices that are coming from inside of us, our intuition, and to lead from that. If to protect what is under your responsibility, whether it's your child and you're not agreeing with something your pediatrician's telling you, or if you don't think it's proper to put the insecticide on your cat every 30 days because that's cancer causing. I think we need to go back to listening to ourselves, because the answers are in our elders. They're in our indigenous populations. Those of us that went through the shamanic healing, our children, there's an innocence there that is very connected to life and the flowers and seeing the sacredness in the life around us that unfortunately gets brainwashed out of us. So I'd like for us to go back to that. There's a bit of an innocence there, but there's an extreme intelligence that is very respectful to the planet. And I think that is the only thing that will save the planet moving forward, or at least the ecosystems. I mean, the earth will be here long after the humans are gone, but the ecosystems will save that. Is that indigenous knowledge that is innate and intuitive to us? That is what I would consider more of a heart knowledge. And if we have a brain heart coherence, which is just not using one part of the brain, just not the neocortex, but all engaging the entire aspect of the brain, the cells in the body, the entire, our liver. I mean, in Chinese medicine, we feel this.
Yes.
We're getting information in our liver, in our spleen. And, you look at different languages, and the Italian language, they talk about feeling things in their liver. And, you can resonate that in how the Chinese see things in their liver, or I feel that in my spleen. And I think it speaks of an inner intelligence there that is sort of come out of the language that we're not using any longer. So the more we get back to that, I think, I feel like the road forward will be better for all life.
I agree. And that is music to my ears, what you're saying. And I hope that if there's anyone out there listening who hasn't heard so much of this kind of viewpoint, that you let that soak in and you wonder what it could be like to get back to your innate, intuitive, empathic, indigenous kind of heart that sees everything as alive and worthy of being in healthy relationship with. And I think if we can all do that, wow, who knows what could happen.
Yeah, and the thing I find is interesting is a lot of people are being shamed out of this because they're worried about cultural appropriation. And what I tell people there, we all have our ancestors, and all of our ancestors had natural herbal medicine and earth consciousness. It doesn't matter if you are from Russia or Europe or Latin America or anywhere, Africa on the planet. They all were natural medicine doctors in our ancestry. And they were all very connected. So it's not cultural appropriation. Shamans existed, for example, throughout the entire planet. So I think times, like, I find this in the younger generation, they're feeling shamed by that cultural appropriation. I think, no, so are you Russian? Well, there's so much shamanic wisdom in Russia. You just have to get in touch with their ancestry. Just follow that line back. But there's, as Carl Jung would say, the collective unconscious that exists in different parts of the planet. And there's a thread of truth through every culture and every land. And, at one point we were all from Africa, we migrated outward. But I don't want I don't want the young generation to get shamed out of following certain paths.
I hear you. And thank you so much for your time and energy today. I really appreciate it. It's been a really interesting conversation. Let's do everything we can to make our indoor cats happy. We're lucky here that my cat is an indoor-outdoor cat. We live in an old home that doesn't have a whole lot of those kind of toxic issues. So we do have a gas stove. But thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a broad-ranging, really interesting conversation. And for all of you out there listening, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you back in the next episode.
Thank you, Dr. Edward. It was wonderful.
Thanks, Ed.
I appreciate it so much.